Good news in West Africa's fight against Ebola. Denmark considers seizing valuables from migrants. And forget the smartphone. Control your droid like a Jedi. Africa 54 starts right now.
Good evening and welcome. I'm Vincent Makori. This is Africa 54. There is fantastic news today in the fight against one of the world's most deadly diseases. Joining us now is Africa 54 health correspondent Lino Madu to tell us more about it. Lino.
The World Health Organization has announced an end to the Ebola virus outbreak in Liberia, meaning all three countries at the epicenter of the West Africa outbreak are now considered Ebola-free. The WHO announcement Thursday came after 42 days without a new reported case in Liberia. When announcing the milestone, the WHO cautioned that more small outbreaks are expected and called for continued strong surveillance to keep the disease at bay. The organization's representative in Liberia pledged that the WHO will continue to support Liberia in its effort to prevent, detect, and respond to any new Ebola cases. This is the first time all three countries at the epicenter of the outbreak, Liberia, Guinea, and Sierra Leone, have been Ebola-free at the same time. Sierra Leone was declared Ebola-free on November 7th and Guinea on December 29th. The Ebola epidemic in West Africa killed more than 11,000 people in the past 2 years and infected over 28,000 others. U.S. President Barack Obama on Tuesday delivered his seventh and last State of the Union address. While he elaborated extensively on domestic matters, he also addressed global issues. The president spoke about the importance of United States aid to African countries to address health challenges such as Ebola and malaria.
That's how we stop the spread of Ebola in West Africa. Our military, our doctors, our development workers, they were heroic. They set up the platform that then allowed other countries to join in behind us and stamp out that epidemic. When we help African countries feed their people and care for the sick, it's the right thing to do, and it prevents the next pandemic from reaching our shores. You know, right now we're on track to end the scourge of HIV/AIDS. That's within our grasp. And we have the chance to accomplish the same thing with malaria, something I'll be pushing this Congress to fund this year.
Joining me in the studio for more perspective on President Obama's health-related remarks is VOA reporter Carol Pearson. Carol, welcome to Africa 54.
Thank you, Lenore.
First of all, West Africa is Ebola-free.
Wonderful news.
Isn't it good news?
Yes, and you know, I've been talking to experts. They've been talking about lessons learned. Number one is that all countries have to have some sort of better health systems where they have laboratories, where they can diagnose things, where they have treatment. Now, this brand of Ebola, the type of Ebola, Zaire Ebola, was believed to be 90% fatal. However, they learned in this epidemic that if you treat people, if you give them fluids, you can reduce that to make it like 20 to 30% fatal. So you can save a lot of people's lives. And then the other thing, the goal now is to make sure that hospitals have running water, that hospitals in these three countries have electricity, that they have trained staff, that they have disease detectives, people who can go around and trace contacts. That's why Ebola was stopped in Nigeria when it went over there, because they had these things in place.
And also, it took collaborative efforts by the global community, including the United States, that played a role there, as President Barack Obama mentioned.
Yes, the U.S. military, they went there and built treatment units. Doctors from the CDC, the Centers for Disease Control, the National Institutes of Health worked on treatments and on vaccines. They trained people when they were there. It wasn't just them coming in. The goal was to train their own health workers And that's what finally succeeded in getting Ebola, plus the vaccine. A vaccine in July was found to be 100% effective. And if you vaccinate all the contacts of somebody who has Ebola and vaccinate their contacts, you can stop the disease.
Quickly, what does this mean now that West Africa is Ebola-free? What does this mean for the vaccine in the future?
They have a vaccine. Merck, a pharmaceutical company, I believe it's called MBR, outside of the United States, they have made the vaccine. They are storing it. They're going to have enough in place so that wherever this strain of Ebola breaks out again, they will have the supplies. They're also working on using a vaccine or developing vaccines against the other strains of Ebola, against Marburg and Lassa fever, too, other hemorrhagic fevers.
Okay, and during the State of the Union address, President Obama also spoke about cancer. He talked about the stepping up efforts here in the United States to fight cancer. First of all, let's take a listen and we'll continue talking about it.
You know, last year, Vice President Biden said that with a new moonshot, America can cure cancer. Last month, he worked with this Congress to give scientists at the National Institutes of Health the strongest resources that they've had in over a decade. So tonight I'm announcing a new national effort to get it done. And because he's gone to the mat for all of us on so many issues over the past 40 years, I'm putting Joe in charge of mission control. For the loved ones we've all lost, for the families that we can still save, let's make America the country that cures cancer once and for all. What do you say, Joe?
Now, President Obama said a new national effort. What does this mean when we know that America is really one of the countries in the world that is leading the way in terms of cancer control and prevention?
Yes, but, you know, the countries that suffer the most from cancer are developing countries. So if the United States can lead the way, what they're hoping to do is that they can control various kinds of cancer. It's not just one disease, various diseases, and it requires different approaches for each of these diseases. So if you can control cancer, then these advances will hopefully help people in developing countries as well. The president is going to submit his budget next month, and with this, he wants to submit a sizable increase for the National Cancer Institute, which is part of the National Institutes of Health, for research and development.
So more funding in the loop?
Yes.
More funding. So quickly then, moving forward in terms of cancer control in Africa, what did experts tell you in terms of the priorities, quickly?
Well, there are different kinds of cancers we already can control, too. We have vaccines against HPV, so we can prevent oral and cervical cancer with a shot, or a series of 3 shots. So that's wonderful news. We know that we can prevent cancer of the liver by vaccinating against hepatitis B. Now, we've also made a lot of progress in treating breast cancer, and that's one of the #1 killers of women around the world. And if that's multiple types of diseases too, there's not just one type of breast cancer. So we need research on all of these areas.
Okay. So some encouraging news, and we'll be keeping an eye on it. Thank you so much, Carol, for joining us. And that was VOA's Carol Pearson reporting. That's our Africa Health Report for today, Vincent.
Well, thank you very much, Lenore. Be sure to watch Lenore Madu's health reports every Tuesday and Thursday right here on Africa 54. Well, the United Nations Children's Agency, UNICEF, says South Sudan is home to the highest proportion of out-of-school children, with more than half of primary and lower secondary age school children not getting education. Niger is a close second with 47% unable to attend school, followed by Sudan and Afghanistan. According to UNICEF, nearly 24 million children in 22 countries have no access to schools. VOA's Zlatisa Hoke has more.
Children in major refugee camps in South Sudan are lucky to get some education, even if it is in makeshift schools or out in the open. One of the largest is Minkaman in the Central Lakes State.
We are going on well with the teaching, but there are many challenges facing us in the teaching field. First of all, teachers are not enough, and the number of people is actually high.
But in South Sudan, 51% of primary and lower secondary school-aged children get no classes at all. UNICEF says the difficulty of collecting data in war zones means the situation could be even worse. Violence following South Sudan's 2011 independence has forced 500,000 people to flee their homes, often to remote places far from civilization. Humanitarian agencies are working to create makeshift schools in refugee camps, but lack funds to provide enough for all who need it. Years of deadly sectarian fighting has discouraged donors.
As you know now, the donors are less forthcoming than before because they are not very pleased with events that have taken place.
And traditionally, only 2% of humanitarian aid is allotted to emergency education. Most of the aid funds are used to provide the essentials for survival: food, shelter, and health care. UN officials say that with so many children spending their youth in refugee camps, this has to change.
We are planning to create a humanitarian platform for education in emergencies when we come to the World Humanitarian Summit in Istanbul in the spring of this year.
UNICEF says that in countries going through long periods of instability and violence, schools are more than a place of learning. The agency is working to provide safe environments for children to play as well as learn and give them hope for the future. Zlatica Ho, VOA News, Washington.
We want to know what you think about Africa 54 and the stories we covered. Join the conversation on Facebook. The address is Africa54, and check out our headlines 24/7 on voaafrica.com. Find me on Twitter at VOA Vince Makori. Now, Denmark's strict stance towards migrants is about to get stricter. Stay with us.
From science and technology, here's what's new.
What's new? Smart shoes. Smart shoes made by Digitsole. Digitsole says these are the first connected, interactive, heated, and shock-absorbent shoes, all supposedly controlled via your smartphone. Using the Smart Shoes app, these shoes will loosen or tighten around your ankles and also track your movement, your calorie burn, and even the wear and tear of the shoes themselves. Using the app, the walker or runner can input data to measure the shoe's shock absorption and let you know when you should replace the shoes. The company says the battery will last for several days and can be wirelessly recharged with a device that fits over the top of both shoes at once. Are these shoes a bit gimmicky with a futuristic but weird look? Maybe, but so what? The bigger problem may be the price. Digitsole's smart shoes are set to go on sale in the U.S. and Europe in September for a hefty $450. For VOA's What's New, I'm Todd Grossans.
Denmark's parliament is debating a proposal that would empower authorities to confiscate valuable belongings to refugees and use them to pay for the refugees' stay in the country. Shocked asylum seekers say the proposed law is a bad idea. However, Danish immigration minister has defended the proposal as being in keeping with the Danish norm that if you can pay for yourself, you must do so. Denmark is one of several European Union countries trying to discourage migrants from seeking asylum on its territory. More than 21,000 asylum seekers entered Denmark last year, up from close to 15,000 in 2014. The government expects around 25,000 people to claim asylum in 2016. Now, for more on the plight of asylum seekers, Joel Millman, spokesman of the International Organization of Migrations, joins me live via Skype from Geneva, Switzerland. Hi, Joel.
Hi.
Now, we get the sense that things are just getting worse for refugees. What are some of the challenges you have observed that they have to deal with in 2016 in Europe?
Look, I don't think things are getting worse. I think it's been a complicated situation for the last year. We expect the winter months to be difficult with the weather and the conditions of the actual route to Europe. But you know, some of the things coming out these last few weeks have all been discussed for years now. Different regulations, different manner that asylum seeking should take place. You know, there's a lot of speculation and a lot of polemic floating around. We know, for example, that Germany released its asylum seeking figures last week, and almost 30% of all the asylum seekers were Europeans themselves, mostly from the Western Balkans. So the idea that this is an out-of-control process that's being driven by refugees from far away is something that we really yet to untangle, and we think that countries deserve time to work their way through the system, and media outlets, including ourselves, should not fan the flames and act like the panic is going on, because we don't think it is.
Yeah, but Joel, you see, the concern has been expressed even by the Pope himself, who was saying, hey, things may be so difficult, but please maintain the compassion that Europe has always had for immigrants. Do you get the feeling, or is that a perception we're having, that the compassion is kind of waning?
It's always been a struggle, but we think Europe's conscience and the world's conscience has always come through. You know, we've heard all kinds of things over the last 12 months. Although a year ago there was a strong lobby in UK to say let the migrants drown, because then they'll stop coming. And of course we overcame that sentiment. We've seen heroic examples for mostly Angela Merkel in Germany, opening their country to hundreds of thousands of people. So of course there's always a tendency to focus on conflict. The New Year's Eve revel that led to several dozen that we know of, dozens of cases that are being investigated by police of pretty bad behavior by people who may or may not have been asylum seekers themselves. That's generated a huge amount of press, and in some ways an outsized press. We don't think this is going to change the overall progress that Europe's making towards integrating these people.
There was a meeting late last year between European leaders and African leaders on how they can stem the flow of migrants from African countries. What is the progress in that direction?
Well, we're not sure that stemming the flow is a goal that's going to bring satisfaction to either side, but we think managing the flow and finding ways to match people with job demand, perhaps temporary visas, perhaps families that share visas among several adult family members who would work on a rotating basis. There's lots of ways of keeping people employed in Europe and yet still supporting large families abroad that would make it less likely that the entire family would have to migrate, as we saw last year. You know, the Gulf countries, the Petro-Emirates have done this for decades with people in the Middle East and throughout the world. So it's not a model that's unknown to the world, and it can be applied here. But we stress always that there is a natural marriage between the job-seeking youth of these countries and the job demands, labor force demands of the developed world, and it's just a matter of managing that marriage properly.
Well, very quickly, what do you project for 2016?
Well, we see no reason why the numbers couldn't remain as high as they were last year. Of course, a year ago, if you'd asked me that, I would have been skeptical. But we saw how efficiently the migrant movement industry, if you will, the trafficking or the smuggling industry, adapted to the demand. And so we know that there's no reason to expect it to diminish naturally. Of course, you know, a peace settlement in some of the conflicted countries is the most important step, and we really need to see progress there. But absent those things, I see no reason why we can't see a repeat of last year's migrant flows, possibly even greater flows.
Joel, thank you very much for your perspectives.
Sure.
Well, Joel Millman is the spokesperson of the International Organization of Migration, speaking to us live via Skype from Geneva, Switzerland. Not too far from there, Germany has outlined plans to tighten deportation laws for foreigners in the wake of the series of attacks on hundreds of women in Cologne and other German cities on New Year's Eve. Police say 19 suspects have so far been identified, all of them migrants. There have been several revenge attacks against foreigners in Cologne. Here's Henry Ridgewell with our report.
Far-right supporters and football hooligans smashed shop windows and damaged cars in the eastern city of Leipzig in the early hours of Tuesday. The rampage began around the same time that 2,000 supporters of the anti-Islamic Pegida movement demonstrated nearby, carrying signs with slogans like "Freedom for Germany."
Especially what annoyed us in the past weeks and months was the whole situation regarding foreigners, that how things were handled. It's not only me. Many people think it will all end in a very bad way.
Germany's justice minister outlined Tuesday tougher deportation laws for anyone convicted of certain crimes, including sexual assault.
Das ist nichts anderes als ein Opferschutz.
This is all about protecting the victims. We owe that to the victims of these serious crimes. However, it is not only reasonable but also necessary, in my view, to protect the innocent overall majority of refugees in Germany. They do not deserve to be labeled as foreigner criminals.
In Deutschland zu schützen. Diese haben es nicht verdient, mit kriminellen Ausländern in einen Topf geworfen zu werden.
Police have recorded over 500 criminal complaints from New Year's Eve, almost half of which involved sexual assault. Analysts say right-wing groups are exploiting the attacks for political gain.
Trying to spread this message, we told you. So we told you that it was unacceptable to have these people. We told you that it was a danger to have these people. We told you that they were coming from different traditions, different culture, and that they couldn't understand our values.
German Chancellor Angela Merkel defended her policy of accepting over 1 million refugees.
Wir wissen seit den schrecklichen Ereignissen in der Nacht von Köln.
We know since the terrible events that night in Cologne that for integration we need the openness of the society, but the refugees also need to be willing to follow our rules and values as well.
In a series of revenge attacks on foreigners in Cologne, 6 Pakistanis, 2 Syrians and 3 men from Guinea have been injured. Germany's politicians must formulate a measured response to what happened on New Year's Eve, says Mamoni.
It's a balance between being honest and try to be practical. And it's a balance between morally accepting them, but also having a strict law when any people is committing a crime like this.
Cologne police have set up a 100-strong team to investigate the New Year's Eve attacks and are looking at exchanges on social media in the run-up to the night. Henry Ridgewell for VOA News, London.
Well, the Islamic State terrorist group is claiming responsibility for Thursday's coordinated bomb and gun attack in the Indonesian capital that left 7 people dead, including all 5 attackers. The violence began with a series of explosions near an upscale shopping center and embassies. People on the streets of Jakarta ran for cover as militants engaged in intense gun battles with police throughout the day. By late afternoon, authorities declared the attack over. An explosion near a Starbucks prompted the coffee chain to close all its locations in Jakarta as a security precaution. Hundreds of Indonesians are believed to have left the country to fight with the Islamic State in Syria and Iraq. Well, in Turkey, southeastern part of that country, 6 people were killed and dozens wounded in a car bomb attack. Authorities are accusing militants from the banned Kurdistan Workers' Party of carrying out the attack. A government spokesman says the overnight blast in Sinar, a town in Diyarbakir province, targeted a police headquarters and associated housing. Turkey's President Recep Tayyip Erdogan has pledged to keep up an offensive against the militants until they are defeated. Well, it's time now for a short break. Still to come on Africa 54. May the force be with you and your droid. We'll be right back.
If you've just joined us, I'm Mariama Diallo, and here is a quick recap of today's headlines.
The World Health Organization announces the Ebola virus outbreak in all of West Africa is over. In Malawi, refugees from Mozambique flood into the country by the hundreds as unrest drives them from home. In the DRC, opposition parties say they will stage rallies to put pressure on President Joseph Kabila to step down when his mandate expires at the end of the year. In Ivory Coast, President Alassane Ouattara introduces new state ministers after cabinet shakeup following re-election last year. In South Africa, zookeepers come up with solutions to keep animals cool during record heat wave.
That's all for today. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.
Welcome back to Africa 54. Here's what's trending. Millions, possibly billions of people, young and old, have dreamed of being a Jedi Knight, using the Force to manipulate the world around them with supernatural powers. At the Consumer Electronics Show in Las Vegas, toy company Sphero unveiled a wearable device that gives users that ability to control a miniature version the latest lovable robot from the Star Wars universe with Jedi powers. Now, the device is called a Force Band and is packed with sensors that measure the orientation of a user's hand. That data is then transmitted to the robot. The wearable Force Band controller is expected to be released in the autumn of 2016. Well, next up, fitness-targeted devices are getting extra features, but they are not all for humans. This is a Wonderwolf, a tracking device you can place on your dog to get a sense of its activity throughout the day. It comes in a range of attractive colors and is all about keeping track of what your pet Pooch gets up to when you're away. Solos is a set of cycling glasses that gives the rider a heads-up display of statistics collected from both the cyclist on the bike. Things like speed, cadence, and heart rate, and all visible without having to look down. As well as performance data, the glasses pull GPS information from a mobile phone and SMS alerts. Well, and finally, in honor of rock legend David Bowie's 69th birthday, and just 2 days before his death, an Ohio zoo named its newly hatched penguin Bowie. The legendary musician died on Sunday after a battle with cancer. Bowie the penguin is the first birth of 2016 at the Cincinnati Zoo and Botanical Garden. The zoo solicited names on Facebook, offering Bowie and Elvis as the name choices. The penguin keepers chose the name Bowie because the zoo already had a king penguin named Elvis. Little penguins, unlike king penguins, prefer milder temperatures, so visitors are not likely to see Bowie and the rest of the colony until spring. And that is what is trending today. Well, that's our show for today. Be sure to watch Africa 54 on our website at voaafrica.com for more news. Tune in to VOA's evening radio show, Africa News Tonight, at 800 UTC, and in the mornings to Daybreak Africa between 0300 and 0600 UTC, Monday through Friday. Thanks a lot for watching, and good night from all of us here in Washington.
Welcome to English in a Minute. Butterflies are some of the most beautiful creatures in the world. The way they float along in the air is so lovely. But what does it mean
to have butterflies?
Let's see how to use this phrase in a conversation.
Hey Anna, how did your presentation go yesterday?
Oh, it went well, but I had butterflies in my stomach the whole time. Speaking in front of a large group of people like that always makes me nervous.
To have butterflies means you feel nervous or excited about something. You might know the feeling of having butterflies in your stomach before a very important event. You can have butterflies before a big test, when you're on a first date, or like Anna, during a presentation. And that's English in a Minute.